Welcome to Inside Outside Innovation, episode 111. Peter Gardner worked for 20 years as a venture capitalist with Allegis Capital before switching to consulting and eventually launching Startgrid. Peter and Startgrid's mission is to intensify the density of resources in ecosystems outside of Silicon Valley so that innovation can continue to happen no matter where you are. IO Innovation is the podcast that brings you the best and the brightest in the world of startups and innovation. It is hosted by Brian Ardinger, founder of Next, a provider of research, events, and consulting services that helps innovators and entrepreneurs build better products, launch new ideas, and compete in a world of change and disruption. If you want to learn more about our team and the content and other services we have to offer, check out insideoutside.io.
So why don't we talk a little bit about kind of how you see software playing a role in making innovation more effective as we move forward?
You know, as a longtime resident of Silicon Valley, I probably no greater density than, what I experience every day, here. And my experience has been that in Silicon Valley, as you're building companies from kind of garage stage to an exit within close proximity, you can find all the relationships, all the people, and all the expertise you need to grow that company. And of course, that's a real advantage. And that kind of density and access to relationships doesn't necessarily exist in a lot of the emerging ecosystems around the world. And that was a problem I experienced firsthand. One of the venture firms I worked for, we had an office in Menlo Park, right in the middle of Silicon Valley, but we also had an office in Sacramento. And I saw the contrast in access to capital and access to those critical relationships between those two ecosystems. So, with Startgrid, what we're thinking about is how do you use software to, one, strengthen ecosystems locally, so make sure that the different organizations supporting entrepreneurship, whether those are accelerators, VCs, angel groups, what have you, connect to each other more easily to strengthen that ecosystem at a local level. But then, importantly, also, how do you connect those ecosystems to each other to create that density so that an entrepreneur in Lincoln is getting the full benefit of what's available in that community. But as they need more capital, as they need access to customers, as they need maybe an advisor that has a certain domain expertise, it's easier for them to find those resources and continue to build their company wherever they choose, so that you don't end up in a situation where companies may get started in a place like Lincoln or Sacramento and end up moving to the Valley, but instead can have the ability to grow the company where they want.
I think that points to the trend that we're also seeing with this move from corporations kind of looking outside of a centralized R&D approach to innovation and looking at, we talk about the inside-outside innovation, both doing some things close to your core that are innovative, but also knowing that the world is changing so fast that you need to look outside. So talk to me a little bit about some of the trends that you're seeing and of how corporations are changing the way they're approaching innovation.
I think to your point, if you go back a couple of decades, a lot of the critical innovation that was driving the product roadmaps and the competitive advantage of large enterprises was driven internally through, often an R&D function. And of course, over the last couple of decades, that's just changed dramatically. And there still are pockets of not invented here out there, but most enterprises have come to recognize that if they're going to keep pace with the rapid changes in innovation, they're going to have to do that through a more network-driven, collaborative approach to innovating. And a critical part of that is working with the startup community. And, I think that's driven by a couple of changes. One is just technology is being developed at a breakneck pace. It's getting adopted in the marketplace much more rapidly than was traditionally the case. I also think for a lot of these large enterprises, there are fields of innovation that are impacting their products and services that are, in many cases, outside of their traditional internal R&D strength. And, by the way, no one's going to dispute, or certainly I won't dispute, the importance of internal R&D. But as things like artificial intelligence, as things like blockchain, as things like robotics, and a variety of other fast-moving technologies are impacting industries that may not have expertise in those areas, collaboration becomes critical for them to adapt.
So the world's changing. Some of the things that you guys are doing with Startgrid are trying to attack those particular problems. So if I was a director of innovation in a corporate lab somewhere, and I wanted to kind of connect with some of the new things that you're seeing, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I think what we're seeing from our customers is they're not just dipping their toe into the water of the startup community, but most of them are very active in participating in startup ecosystems, and not just in Silicon Valley, but ecosystems around the world, because I think they recognize that the critical innovation that could help drive their competitive position. It could be in the Valley, it could be in Stockholm, it could be in Sydney, it could be in Shanghai. So I think it's critical for them to build global ecosystems, and that means a lot of relationships, a lot of data that they have to get their arms around, and our software is one of the ways that they can build and track and gain market intelligence from those global networks. But just as importantly, they have to be able, once they've identified that strategic innovation, to deliver it to stakeholders across their business units and corporate functions. And that's actually where I think a lot of innovation functions have struggled. It's one thing to scout and find interesting startups. It's quite another to get that technology successfully implemented inside their organization. And I think the innovation teams are feeling more and more pressure to show real business outcomes, to bring greater efficiency to the businesses, to drive new revenue streams and increase profitability. And I think what that's leading to is a move from activity-based metrics, how many entrepreneurs you're seeing, how many events you're going to much more outcomes-based metrics, and that requires that delivery piece.
On the flip side of that, so obviously there's a lot of startups that are in this world where they're trying to get customers faster. They're trying to tap into corporations as that partner, as that investor, as that customer base. And that what advice or what things have you seen from a startup side that startups can do to kind of tap into this new world that we're living in?
Well, I think that there's organizations that have played a really important matchmaking role, and I think will continue to, and those include the accelerators, the venture capital community. A lot of enterprises, as they try to figure out which entrepreneurs have the most promising technology, and I think the enterprises deal with a huge signal to noise problem in the startup community, and have often partnered up with accelerators in the venture community to try to focus their efforts and find the most credible startups that are frankly, worth their time. So from an entrepreneur's point of view, getting into those accelerator programs, getting investment from the right venture firms has been one really important strategy for getting access to early adopter customers and product market fit. I think, beyond that, probably too much of it has been sort of serendipity. It's as an entrepreneur myself, we spend a lot of time, just out talking to people, going to conferences, trying to bump into the right folks, and ultimately get the right entry point into a large enterprise that we like to work with. One of the things we're trying to do with Startgrid is, to bring a little bit more transparency and better matchmaking between the startups and the enterprises. And, we've chosen to do that by providing better tools for the folks like yourself, frankly, who are kind of connectors and ecosystem builders, and by helping those individuals build their network and connect their startups to enterprises, that's helping to improve the connect rate. Folks find each other in a very fast-moving and complex ecosystem.
So for corporations that are trying to do this, a lot of times we see them jump into it, and they kind of chase whatever the shiny object is of innovation. So whether it's, hey, our competitors doing a hackathon, we need to do a hackathon, or hey, we need to start up a accelerator or whatever. What advice would you have for early innovation teams out there that are trying to dip their toe into this outside world to try to better understand how to have an impact without just going down a variety of different rabbit holes? Are there any particular steps or tactics that you've seen that have worked really well?
Yeah, I'm kind of a believer in a multi-pronged approach. I mean, I think for most innovation teams, they're focusing in a couple of areas. They're focusing inside their organization on how to improve the agility of their own employees, and they recognize that there's a huge amount of wisdom and innovative ideas inside their organization. So that's one thrust. The second thrust is this external piece and how to be more collaborative. And I think in that regard, I'm a believer in kind of a multi-pronged strategy. So, partnering with the venture community and the accelerator community is, I think, an important strategy. Things like hackathons are certainly an important strategy. And, the other thing that I've seen a lot of, and increasingly, is collaboration between groups of enterprises sort of working together to foster innovation in areas that are strategic to them. So, for example, we have a banking customer who's collaborating with a series of other banks around blockchain and fostering partnerships with startups to help, advance that field of innovation. I literally just finished breakfast with someone who leads innovation for a large energy company, and they've gotten together with 10 other global energy companies to run a series of global accelerator programs, trying to foster more innovation in areas that are strategic to energy companies. So I think a lot of it, this is a business development exercise, and
right.
You need to be out in the community. You need to be partnering with folks that have access to deal flow and market intelligence. And it does take time, right? And I think there has to be an expectation that there will be a lag time between when you begin to engage the startup community and when you're going to start seeing results. But I would argue that you got to start that process now. That the level of innovation coming out of the startup community is not going to diminish anytime soon. And I think that the enterprises that become genuinely good at partnering with startups, that will be a competitive advantage and a core competency that's going to serve them well over the long term, especially if they can, complement that with their internal R&D and product development.
That's the end of another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Peter for taking time to talk with us. Visit startgrid.com to learn more about his team and insideoutside.io to learn about ours. Until next time, go out and innovate.